G'day Groovers. This is going to be the highly abbreviated story of how it took me 8 years to come up with my own electrolyte drink recipe. And I'll show you in a minute exactly what that recipe is. But firstly, people are as different as their electrolyte requirements. And this means that the proportions of sodium, magnesium and potassium in their electrolyte mix are going to be highly individual. How do we deal with this? Well, I think starting with a basic formula and working from there is a good first step. We see how we feel with a certain amount of sodium. If that alone isn't working, then we try some magnesium as well, and then possibly also try some potassium. So before I go any further, here's the proportions I use after fine-tuning the recipe for myself for about 8 years. So my mix is based on 5 teaspoons of salt with half a teaspoon of cream of tartar, otherwise known as potassium bitartrate, and also a half a teaspoon of magnesium glycinate powder. So I multiply that particular ratio by anything from 20 to 50 times to make a mix that'll last me a month or more. I think it's important to explain how I settled on these proportions for myself, just as an illustration of how our own bodily requirements and environmental factors will vary profoundly. And that although generalised formulas could be a good start, they may necessitate a lot of adjustment to meet our individual needs. It's also a given that many people, or most people on a ketogenic diet, will need considerable electrolyte supplementation. As for me, the first 6 years or so of juggling my extended university studies, as well as a very physically demanding job and running a business, absolutely put me on a collision course with muscle fatigue, cramps, even a little restless leg syndrome and brain fog when I wasn't getting enough electrolytes. For the first few years, the extra salt intake was always an afterthought. A small salty water mix every couple of days was all I did. A couple of years into that, I started taking from 200 to 600 milligrams of magnesium glycinate at nights in the form of those big white pills. And that helped a lot. It helped a lot at night and for general muscle relaxation and relief. But I was still getting more fatigue than I thought I should have. So over time, I gradually increased the salt intake, and about 3 years ago, I finally got my intake to match my personal requirement. This is just ongoing trial and error. So in the summertime, when I was doing intense physical labour in intense heat, I found that about 3 to 4 extra teaspoons of salt per day would keep me functioning fairly well. And in the winter time, probably about 2/3 of that. This is on top of fairly heavily salting my food. Thing is, as the years rolled on, the magnesium was getting less effective. So I was now taking magnesium glycinate and magnesium citrate, and they were getting progressively less effective at quelling the muscle aches. So I ended up taking 600 to 800 milligrams per day while getting progressively less muscle relief. And I also started getting really stiff and sore lower neck and trapezius muscles. So this went on for about a year. I was using a couple of teaspoons a day of light salt, which contains about half potassium chloride. So I was doing that to up my potassium, and I actually thought that would have been enough to have it covered. However, the neck stiffness continued, and I was getting the occasional massage for relief, and that wasn't very effective. And then that's where I had the epiphany. This thing that came out of the blue that really surprised or really shocked me. So I Googled what other people were using for potassium supplementation and noticed that some crazy people were using cream of tartar, the cooking ingredient. So I went to the supermarket, picked up a little tub of that for a couple of bucks, took it home, took about half a teaspoon in some water, and bingo, fair dinkum. All the neck stiffness went 100% within a couple of hours. I could not believe what a simple solution that was. So needless to say, I added a small amount of the cream of tartar to the electrolyte mix, and there it was. I simply had not been getting enough potassium. So also I started adding the magnesium glycinate mix or powder to the electrolyte mix, and I was able to reduce the amount of magnesium I was taking at night. So finally, after about 6 years, I had a basic electrolyte mix that was meeting my needs. Eventually, I zoned in on the ratios that would become my basic formula. I no longer suffer from the salt deficiency fatigue, and muscle soreness and stiffness are very much under control. All of this in light of the fact that my poor battered body is 8 years older. So what have I learned? My body on a ketogenic diet needs a lot more salt than I'd originally thought. And I also need daily magnesium and potassium supplementation to stave off muscle stiffness and soreness. Now, I'm not saying for a second that everybody needs the same proportions of electrolytes, but it is safe to say that most people on an ultra low carb diet should give it serious consideration and put some effort and experimentation into ensuring an adequate intake. We can easily get caught out having a deficiency. And when we are deficient, it can significantly impede our cognitive ability to identify that electrolytes are the problem. We simply can't think straight in those circumstances. We function much better when we get what we need. Well, I got to go see a man about a dog, so I really hope this has been enlightening. I hope that you can be smarter than I was. And thank you so much for watching. If you find this information useful, please subscribe and have a terrific day.